All right. Welcome to another edition of Sabbath Lounge. This is Matt.
And Jake here.
And we have a special guest who is no stranger to us, but we want to let you know we've got Joshua Myers back on with us. And Joshua, how's it going?
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Thanks for having me again. This is great.
Good. Well, we're glad that you could be here, and we talked after our initial interview, and we said, let's go back through and spend a little more time on the Law Before the Law series, and let's talk about that, because it does seem like a lot of people have some fundamental flaws in their understanding of some of these, the law and when it started, and so many people. I don't know about you, Joshua and Jake, but I've had many people in the last month or so say things like, you're under Moses. You're under Moses' law. Have you heard people say that?
I have. And it reminds me of some of Yeshua's words where, he's like, it's not me that accuses you, it's Moses. And it's like, he even says that, Moses has the ability to accuse us. So, saying that we're under Moses' law isn't a bad thing, as some people try to portray it as.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I also feel like it's one of those deals where it's. I think Moses would be like, "Wait a minute, you said it's my law. Actually, it's Yahweh's law. So don't say it's mine." I think
and definitely.
Yeah, I think Moses and Paul. I think they could sit down both and have an interesting conversation about. This is what people say about me. This is what people have said about me. So one day I would like to sit down with them and have that discussion, see what they say.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
So anyway, we find ourselves talking about, we want to kind of tell you a few things about Joshua here. And so he's got a website. And Joshua, what's the website?
So this is kind of the hub of everything I do. It's beacons.ai/JNMYERS. It's like a link tree type site. And so it has everything that I'm a part of. It goes to, the comics I do, some T-shirts I design, and some other things that I've just been a part of.
Okay, so it's pretty easy to find him there. He's got a presence on TikTok, and you can see some things he's done there. And so, what is this one here that I'm looking at? That's part of your kind of like a link tree.
That's the beacon still, yeah. So that's kind of what it looks like. I always put my the latest comic on there, so that if you just want a glimpse at what it is, you can see it there, and then click on the top link to go and see the full thing and read the commentary if there is any.
Okay, good deal. And then this is your Instagram. You've got a presence there as well that you, and so he, of course, any of this, please follow him. If you're already not doing that, he would appreciate that. And then he's got a Facebook presence as well, and it's got more links and to everything that he does there. And he's got books. So
I do.
And he's got a new book that just came out today.
Just came out today. Yeah, I just got my first shipment of them from in the mail today, and so I have a new one. It's called "I Cannot Keep the Law," except the "not" is scratched out.
Oh, nice.
And it's really my first book, even though it's my third. But it was the first one I wrote, and it was kind of my journey of going through all the arguments against a follower of Christ keeping the law, and comparing it to the Bible and just breaking it down. And so it's a walk through that. And because it is, straight and narrow, it does have a ton of comics related to all those different bits as you go through it as well.
Okay, good. All right, that's awesome. So
that's in comic form also. Then you're saying?
It's kind of a mix. It's a book, but it also has comics in there as well.
Oh, okay.
If you look through, been able to look through my Church versus Bible one, it's similar but slightly different. The Church versus Bible was kind of putting a comic and then putting commentary underneath it, kind of similar how I make my posts now. This one's more of you're reading through it, and then there's maybe a comment to the side, or a comic to intro a chapter, or something of that nature.
So Joshua, tell us, where can we find your brand new book if we want to buy it?
Right. So if you go to my Beacons AI link, I'll have the links there. But if you want to look for me on Amazon, I do have an Amazon page, author page of Joshua Myers. But like I said, the book is called I Cannot Keep the Law. So if you do I Cannot Keep the Law, Joshua Myers, it should pop up.
Okay. All right. So great. So we've got the website there that you can look at. And so if you're just listening to this on audio, there is a visual that goes with this on YouTube. So, and we'll get right into it. So Joshua, we've taken, you shared your comics with us, and we are definitely a fan. And this first one is talking about Cain and Abel. And so, from my own background, this is something that perplexed me, especially as I began to study a little bit more. And I can remember at least having one conversation in my life with an atheist who even brought this up, and they're like, how can the God you believe in go so crazy on these guys, and there were no instructions on how to do a sacrifice? And I didn't have an answer for him. So so this,
and we're not really prepped with an answer for that kind of a question either. In church learning, I mean, that one doesn't really come up.
Agreed, and it comes and from the standpoint of not believing the law happened until Mount Sinai, you run into that. You have that gap. But if we are we going to go ahead and read it?
Yeah, we'll go through the scriptures, and the first one we have pulled up here is Genesis 4:3-7.
Yeah, and so starting in 3, and in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. So the important thing here that, and whenever we go to the actual law point, is notice it just says brought of the fruit of the ground. It doesn't say anything about it, just that he brought fruit of the ground. So this is, he just went and got some, could have been last year's, could have been, whatever. He just brought some fruit. Then verse 4, and Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. On Abel, it says he brought the firstlings, the firstborn. So he brought the first, he brought the best, which is, whenever we look into the law, is what God requires. He requires that first, the first fruit, the best of what you have, whether it be of the flock or of the ground.
Yeah, exactly. So, but if you don't, it helps understanding that the law existed, and we have to know that Adam was super intelligent. First off, he had the ability to name all the animals and remember them, and I'm like, I can't even remember a phone number. And so his intelligence had to be just incredible, and he walked and talked with God in the garden, and he knew lots of stuff, and we can't even begin to understand probably how many things he knew, and
what they talked about.
Yeah, you have to know that he talked to him about all these kinds of things, and
I was just going to say, and this is right after the fall, they ate of the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Yeah,
it gave them knowledge. I mean, that's why it's calling it that. So I mean, to think that we know more than Adam did is kind of laughable.
Right.
Yeah. But I think the reason that gained so much of a foothold, if you will, is because of the evolutionary model that's taught in schools, and it goes it's counter that narrative to say that this what would you call ancient man, caveman,
Neanderthal.
that's not very smart, and we've evolved, and actually the three of us and many others out there know that actually I think we're a lot more stupid than, it's not trending in the right way for humankind.
Right.
I even see it in myself. I mean, I was a smart kid growing up. I could remember things and do things now. Now that we have the internet at our hands, I don't remember things as much often anymore because I don't have to.
Yeah.
I can look it up. And I've had people tell me, well, that's how we're smarter. It's like, no, that's not making us smarter. That's actually making us dumber.
Right.
Yeah. Think about navigation. I can remember back in the day when I had a job and I had a Mapsco that I kept in the front seat of my car, and I figured out where I was going analog, and that's because I'm old. But I didn't have a GPS, and to now I just press the button and it tells me where to go.
Yep.
So anyway,
Yeah, I think too in this verse 4, until you really know and kind of have the mindset of the law, the things like the firstling of the flock doesn't really jump out at you, or the fat thereof, and how important that is.
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
No, I agree.
yeah. And studying the Torah, you start to understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, you see that. And bringing up the fat thereof as well. I don't know that the verses I pulled that I have associated with it talk about the fat. But yeah, that is a good point too, because there are verses that it talks about the fat is God's. It's not ours.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. That's good. And then we also have Exodus 13:11 through 12. Jake, will you read this one?
When Yahweh brings you to the land of the Canaanites and gives it to you, as he swore to you and your ancestors, sacrifice every firstborn male offspring to Yahweh. The firstborn male offspring of each of your animals belongs to Yahweh.
Yep. And yeah, that's the command. So that's what Abel brought. He brought the firstborn. It doesn't tell us it was a male, but it does say he brought the firstborn.
Yeah.
And if we're to let the Bible interpret the Bible, while it doesn't say male, and God accepted it, it was a male.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can assume that it's clean as
Right.
well. So because I
Exactly.
remember
That
having
too.
some conversation with somebody about that, and it was just interesting how they couldn't understand that concept. But I was like, it had to be clean. There's no way that he sacrificed a pig and it was okay. It
Right.
didn't work that way.
Right. And I like the way that you did the comic too, because you don't get a lot of condemnation from Yah to Cain. It's correction he gets.
Exactly.
And that goes to a point we were going to bring up. We see an opportunity for another piece, another scripture reference.
Yeah.
So, and that is the idea of the cities of refuge, which we just recently read in the Torah portion, because Cain clearly has this city of refuge that he could go, and he's not immediately given capital punishment, and so it makes me think that. Well, Jake, go ahead and say what you were going to say. I know you were going to say something there.
Yeah. So what we've kind of bantered around at our when we do study on this topic is that perhaps, and we'd like to get your thoughts on it. And maybe we'd like to see a comic on it.
Yeah.
But so the punishment for murder is death, whereas the punishment for manslaughter is to be sent to the city of refuge, so you're not killed by the avenger of blood, right?
Right.
So to us, this kind of seems like a manslaughter situation where when Cain slew Abel, right? Because of the punishment that's given out.
Yeah.
And
No,
I don't know
that's
if
a
you've
good
thought
point.
on that at all, and I could kind of explain where we're coming from a little bit more if you'd like.
No, yeah, please do, because I haven't thought of that, and that is a good point.
Okay, so one of the thoughts was, though they do know of death because they're obviously offering an animal here, but we don't have any record of any person dying at this point, up to this
Right.
point. So it almost, and when Cain is angry, Yahweh doesn't tell him he's sinning in his anger. It's you're allowing sin to crouch at your door because of your anger. And in that, he takes his anger and in a fit of rage, he didn't sit by the wayside and plan to kill his brother. In a fit of rage, he kills him. And based on the punishment, it sounds like more he didn't intend to kill him or he didn't realize he would kill him, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can see that. I can definitely see that with what the text says. That's an interesting point. And then with the city of refuge thing, because he is given a mark so that He can't be avenged
Right.
by the avenger of blood. So yeah, no, that's a really good. I haven't thought of that. I'll have to study that out. And if I do, yeah, I was going to say I'll have to borrow that and make a comic out of that too, because that's a good one.
Well, it's yours.
It's
Free
yours.
gift.
Well, thank you.
All right, so we did kind of rabbit trail there, but Exodus 23:19 continues, "You must bring the best of the first produce harvested from your soil to the house of Yahweh your Elohim. Never cook a young goat in its mother's milk." But the last part of that we know is not necessarily applicable to this, but definitely you see that that Abel that he
That Cain is supposed to be bringing the best of his first produce.
Yeah, and he does not do that. So then Exodus 34:19.
Every first male offspring is mine, even the firstborn males of all your livestock, whether cattle, sheep, or goats.
So
And that's just another showing what Abel did, showing another one, reaffirming that he was bringing the first.
in Exodus 34:26, "You must bring the first and best of the produce harvested from your soil to the house of Yahweh your Elohim, and never cook a young goat in its mother's milk."
Yep. And again, showing what Cain did not do. So just giving our two witnesses there that we have in Scripture.
And then Numbers 18:15.
Every firstborn male, human or animal, that is brought to Yahweh is yours, but you must buy back every firstborn son and the firstborn male of any unclean animal.
So once again, confirmation that they were doing all these things before the law was officially written down.
Yep.
Didn't mean it didn't exist. All right, we'll move on to the next one is with Noah. And so, Noah, if we went and did a man on the street and said, how many animals did Noah take on the ark? Everyone is going to say what?
2 by 2.
2 by 2, that's right. And we know.
Might even sing the song for it.
That's right, that's right. They leave out the 7 pairs thing, so we're going to take a look at that. So, but this is another one that I did think about from at a young age and go, how did Noah know what was clean and unclean? And I'm sure other people have asked this question. Well, that means it's because that there was law before the law. Hence that's why we're here. So someone read Genesis 6:19 here.
Go ahead, Joshua.
Okay. Bring 2 of every living creature into the ship in order to keep them alive with you. There must be male and female, 2 of every type of bird, every type of domestic animal, and every type of creature that crawls on the ground will come to you to be kept alive. Take of every kind of food that can be eaten and store it. It will be food for you and the animals. Noah did this. He did everything that Elohim had commanded him. Yahweh said to Noah, "Go into the ship with your whole family, because I have seen that you are alone, are righteous among the people of today. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and a female of each, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and a female. Also take 7 pairs of every kind of bird, a male and a female of each, to preserve animal life all over the earth after the flood."
There you go.
Pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Very straightforward, yeah.
And I changed translations on us, but sorry about that.
That's fine. But here, like you were talking about, how to know what what animals were clean and unclean, and it goes back to something that I believe you had mentioned in a TikTok comment that we were discussing this before here, is that some things were created for a purpose. We as humans, we create things for purposes all the time. We have vehicles. I have a car in the garage. I won't go use my car to try to cook supper tonight. That's not its purpose. God did the same thing. He created animals with purposes. Some of them, their purpose is food. Some of them, their purpose is something else. They're not for us to eat.
Yeah.
Which goes into the clean and the unclean.
Yep, that's right. I've seen a great illustration where someone took an aquarium and they put mussels on one side and no mussels on the other, and they show it's like the same water, and the mussels are cleaning the water, and the water with the mussels is clean, and the water that doesn't have the mussels is dirty. And when we look at things like the Gulf of Mexico, and why is the Gulf of Mexico so dirty and nasty? Well, they have overfished the shrimp and the clams and the oysters, all these things we're not supposed to eat. They've overfished it so much that all the things that Yahweh put in there to clean the ocean, we decided we needed it, and we've removed all the cleaners. And no one ever talks about that in environmentalism, but I think it's worth mentioning.
Yeah. And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier. It's kind of an evolutionary mindset, because we're the top of the food chain, so anything below us we can eat. And it's like, no, that's not how God set it up. He didn't set us at the top of a food chain. That's not the food chain. He has animals for certain purposes. Some of them we can eat, some of them we can't.
That's right, and it's established at creation. So we'll go look at Leviticus now, and so I don't know if you want to read all of Leviticus 11 or just pick some things out of here.
I think we could probably just pick some things out.
Yeah.
Just to show that, God says these are unclean and these are clean.
Yeah, so for instance, in verse 3 there, 3:11, it talks about, or 11:3, talks about the cloven hoof and chews the cud. And we know we can eat those things, and so and it goes on, and it's very specific about the things that are clean and unclean.
Right, and number 4 is good too. You shall not eat them that chew the cud, but don't divide the hoof. And then animals that divide the hoof but don't chew the cud are unclean also.
Yeah.
And then in verse 5, we see that God doesn't like Sonic Drive-In because he says we can't have conies.
That's right. That's right. No conies. Very good. Very good. And definitely no swine here. So,
yep.
And then it goes on to specify the fish. It's got to have fins and scales. And
this one here, verse 11, is even interesting. It's they're an abomination. Even their carcasses are an abomination to you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, I'm from the South. You guys are too, I believe.
Yeah.
Y'all know full well that lard is like our butter. If you go to any kind of like Southern kitchen, that's what they're using for butter. They're using pig carcass. The pig fat.
Yeah.
And and here it says no, you're not supposed to touch that stuff.
Yeah, not even touch it. Yeah, the abomination's a pretty big word. You don't just throw that around.
Yep.
Right.
Agreed.
And it's interesting because that's the same descriptor that he has for things like homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And
that people will jump on and say, hey, you're not supposed to do this. It's an abomination. Well,
right.
You're not supposed to eat pig. It's an abomination.
Right.
Yeah. And then with the birds here, it's pretty much the predator kind of birds, the predator birds, mm-hmm. and the scavenger kind of birds, and those are the ones that he lists out to not eat. And it makes sense. He made these birds to go clean up the mess, because they're the sanitation department. They're doing in science we would call it their niche or their role or job, and that's what they do. That's what he made them to do this. And it's a perfect system because he made it.
Agreed. I would point out too, because we were having that discussion the other day as well, because apparently chickens have a very wide range of what they will eat too, and they can kind of seem similar to some of these that aren't clean.
Right. And
it goes into, while we can kind of see some themes in them, it doesn't necessarily mean that is the theme. Because like goats. How many times in cartoons growing up were goats chewing on a tin can?
Right.
Uh-huh.
So it's not necessarily what they eat, but what their function is.
Yeah. That's
and
true.
I think too, it's how they eat. Like some of the birds that you can eat have like a gizzard and a crop and that kind of thing, and the other kinds don't really have that. And it's a way of chewing the cud basically for them.
Yeah, and it's also an interesting metaphor for us. I think maybe if you'd say on the sod level of the scripture, a deeper meaning of it, would be these animals chew on the teachings, if you will. They just don't hear something and accept it. They think about it, they chew on it, they process it, and that's how he wants us to be. He wants us to be thinking about things and conscious of the things that we do, and methodical about what we do, just like these critters are. If you watch a cow eat, a sheep eat, they're very methodical, and they eat a little bit, and then they got to sit down and chew on this for a minute and process it, and then they get up and go again. Whereas the pig and dogs and other animals, they just, they
Scarf
just,
it down.
yeah,
And
instantly.
then it's over.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a way different even style of how they eat.
Yeah. And, using that too, not all of them, but, things like cows, that bit that they're chewing, it stays with them longer as well.
Yeah.
And to your point of the, picking, it's not, it's just, they have it and then it's gone.
Nope, we're losing you again. I think we'll just do our little trick and then just, so hang on, we'll just call you again.
Do you want to call out a time on there?
I don't know. That one lasted longer.
Yeah. For when we start, when you put it together.
Okay, perfect. Oh, yeah, so I'm at basically 30 minutes in. So
Okay.
Good. We'll move on to the next piece of this. And so it's going on, looking at Noah, continuing to describe more of the things to eat and not eat. In 11, you see abomination again. And
This looks like a...
so in 10, it's,
this
muscles.
is a duplicate.
And oh, it is a duplicate.
It is, yep.
Yeah. There we go.
There
20.
it is.
So all fowls that creep going on all fours shall be an abomination to you.
Yep. This verse 22, I think, gets twisted a little bit sometimes. Like even in this translation, they say the locust and the beetle and the grasshopper.
Mm-hmm.
That word beetle is generally more something similar to a grasshopper is what it's talking about.
Yeah, and it's important to not just rely on one translation, but to go and compare others and also look into the original words.
Right.
Yeah. And this one, it mentions this a couple of times here about not touching the carcasses of these unclean, and you'll be unclean till evening. And just kind of says some of the same kind of things.
Yeah. Well, and notice too on that, it's not if you eat it, you're unclean until evening. It's always touching the carcass, because farmers, you're going to, again, they have purposes. So you're going to have pigs on your farm for a purpose, and sometimes they're going to die. You're going to have to mess with it. So yeah, you're gonna have to touch a carcass, not to cook it, but you're going to touch it to dispose of it properly.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point. A lot of people don't understand that there's provision in the Torah for mistakes, for things that happen. And I think that a lot of people that want to argue you shouldn't do this, they don't know and they don't understand that He built provision in it from the beginning for
guilt.
Yeah, there's a way to resolve this.
Yep.
It was built in. All right, and then going on 29 through 35. And 35 is interesting because basically if any part of a carcass falls, the vessel should be unclean and they should be broken down. So, if there's a piece of pottery is sitting out and something happens here, the whole vessel is unclean. And
I think it's because of the pores and stuff whenever they heat up. I know we ourselves had a friend give us one of those stoneware baking things, and we know that they don't follow the same eating methods that we do, and they probably did cook some unclean animals in it, and so we had to get rid of it because it's like, this first right here.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. All right, good. All right, anything else?
I think that was it on that one.
Okay. All right, and then let's see.
Oh, it's like a dead animal on your seed, or an unclean animal touching the seed kind of situation.
Oh yeah. So if you're out in the if you have a garden outside and one of these animals dies on it, it's not making your food unclean, which goes back to kind of similar to what Mark 7, where, Yeshua is talking with the Pharisees, and they're like, because they didn't wash their hands, their food's unclean. It's saying, no, your food's still fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's underground. It's still seed form. Don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and just the detail that's in here. I mean, he's like thought of everything. Everything has been accounted for. So
Yeah, it's like, so here in 37, it's if the seed hasn't started growing yet, it'll stay clean. But if it has started growing, it, I'm basing that off of water being put on the seed, and now the carcass falls on it. Now it's unclean.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes you think about a lot of the fertilizers and stuff that are like fish meal from like unclean fish and stuff like that. Might be great for your garden, but I don't know. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And I know last Sabbath at our fellowship, we were talking about somebody was using manure from unclean animals, and they're like, it works really well. It's like, well, I don't know. It doesn't talk about that specifically here.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, and you don't always know, especially if you buy manure. It would be hard to know what animal produced it, but definitely something interesting and something you got to research and study on your own. And I don't think you can enforce that on someone else. But if you're convicted at one way or the other, then you should follow that.
Oh, totally agree.
Yeah,
totally agree.
And I think where we get in trouble sometimes, people want to enforce something on someone else that maybe's not there, or not solid.
yeah.
It goes on in basically 44 through 47 here. But in 47, I want to point out, it says to make a difference between the unclean and clean, between the beast that may be eaten and the beast that may not be eaten. So, he's very clearly, just in case you didn't get it, that that's what this is about, what you can eat and what you can't eat.
And then also in verse 45, this is real important, I think. At least it was for me. We like to look at the New Testament and see where Messiah says, "Be holy, for I am holy," and talks about Yahweh saying that. He's quoting from places like this. He's talking about clean and unclean laws, and then he says in verse 45, "Be holy, for I am holy."
Yeah.
It's a way to be set apart.
Yep.
Yep.
Very good.
Well, and you pointing this one out too reminded me of Ezekiel 22:26, where a prophetic passage saying, "Her priests have done violence to my law and profaned my holy things. They have made no distinction between the holy and the profane.
Right.
They have not taught the difference between the unclean and the clean."
Exactly.
So that right there, it's like it's important to them.
No,
Right.
yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things too. It's almost like that scripture where it talks about if you've been entrusted with a little, it's just that concept of, and it's a life principle too that we live by. That if I can't trust you with this little thing, well, why am I going to be able to trust you with this bigger issue?
Exactly.
And it's interesting that the first food rule ever given to mankind, the first rule is food.
Yeah.
And yet people act like it's such a big deal that there might be more food rules, but it is interesting when you put it in that perspective. But,
I agree.
But just like Jake said, it's about being holy and set apart people. And then we move on to Deuteronomy 14. And so he lays out some things. So he repeats a bunch of the same things here. I think it's important to point out, Jake, why don't you read like 3 through 7 there?
All right. Never eat anything that is disgusting to Yahweh. Here are the kinds of animals you may eat: oxen, sheep, goats, deer, gazelles, fallow deer, wild goats, mountain goats, antelope, and mountain sheep. You may eat all animals that have completely divided hooves and that also chew their cud. But some animals chew their cud while others have completely divided hooves. You may not eat these kinds of animals. They include camels, rabbits, and rock badgers. I mean, who of us can say They haven't eaten a rock badger.
I haven't.
I don't even know what a rock badger is.
I think it's a marmot.
I think it's like a honey badger.
A honey badger. Honey badger
No,
don't
okay.
care.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then 8, also, you may not eat pigs.
Oh, yeah, right out there.
Never
It says
eat
it.
their meat or touch their dead body. So, I mean, it's just basically the same things that we've discussed there. But yes, it's just clearly, so clearly Noah knew these things. And so when Yahweh said, hey, bring the clean animals, there's not a discussion where Noah's like, what? What do you mean
Yeah.
clean?
Right.
It wasn't new
mean, I can-
information.
Yeah. And that too, the part you brought out too, the disgusting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm calling it disgusting. Like, those of us that have kids or can remember our childhood, there's things that we did as kids or our kids have done that is disgusting. And it's like, it appalls us. And that's the kind of relationship that we have with our Father. There's things that we do that appalls us. And he's like, please don't do that.
Yeah. Well, that brings up a good point. Today I was working on something, and that's what I recorded, and was just that concept that some people fight so much against Torah, and then especially in this week's Torah portion out of Deuteronomy, it's just this long list of all kinds of things, and basically the Torah is your dad writing you this note and saying, hey, these are words to live by, son. Don't do this. Little things like your dad would tell you, don't marry a whore, son. Pick a job that you like, and there are natural consequences, to us when we didn't do what our dad asked us to do. If we didn't listen to the advice, usually it ended up with some consequences. We initially thought our dad was just stupid, but then later we experienced some consequences, and we're like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think too much we look at it like he set up a system and we have to, if we don't follow it, he's going to club us. And it's really, he set up a system so that, the way I picture it is he set it up to kind of run on its own. So he doesn't have to micromanage every little thing. So he set it up to work a certain way, and he's telling you how it works so you don't screw it up and hurt yourself.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Mostly for our advantage. And
Right.
it's a blessing to us to do this, and it makes
Yeah.
our life so much easier.
I was just going to say that it's like buying something for my kid. You get this piece of furniture that you got to put together. You got to follow the instructions so that you have this, furniture put together correctly.
Right.
God has our instructions for having a life living out correctly. And, in the church, we even call the Bible the instruction book. This is how we're to live, except, we've been taught to discount part of it. Imagine if you bought a shelf from IKEA and threw out the first 2/3 of the instructions and then tried to put the shelf together.
Yeah. Yeah. No telling what you make. May not work. That's a good point. Good. All right. So then we'll move on to a new one. And this one is, this is about, it says, it's
So he says, by no means,
yeah.
come stay at my house. We will eat unleavened bread. And then the
Yeah.
other people say,
Oh, so this is Lot, isn't it?
Yeah, this is Lot. This is the where I'm pointing out that there seems to be a correlation here between Passover of the account of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah, and then the Passover account, because as we read, we can see, and I think I have that included in the text there. But when we read the story of Abraham, whenever the men and God came to Abraham, He made them. The word for bread there, I believe, is hametz, the bread that has leavening in it. Whereas Lot, specifically, it's after sundown, and we know it's after sundown now. And Lot's like, hey, I'll give you unleavened bread. Come in my house, which is two of the regulations for Passover, unleavened bread and being in your house.
yeah, stay the night in the house there.
Yeah, very
Yep.
good. So this account can be found in Genesis 19, and there came two angels to Sodom at evening. And Lot sat at the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face towards the ground, and he said, Behold, now, my lords, turn, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early and go your way. And they say, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed them greatly, and they returned unto him, and entered his house, and he made them eat a feast. And he did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. Ding, ding, ding.
Yep.
So you're
Yeah,
saying
it even has
feast of
the
Passover.
wash your feet situation there.
Yes.
Yeah, good observation, for sure. So definitely a reference to the law before the law. They knew that Lot, and that's interesting about Lot, because it is easy, I think, for us to look at Lot and go, Lot, man, what kind of guy was Lot? And it is really easy to be judgmental of Lot, but in the end, he was considered righteous enough that,
To get pulled
that
out of
God
there, yeah.
saved him, and this is confirmation that Lot did some things right.
Yeah. Yep. He may have not been living perfectly, but he was trying.
Yeah, I think too it's his connection with Abraham
Oh yeah,
saved him also.
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't say look at Lot and live like Lot. I don't think you're going to see that on many T-shirts. Probably not the best way to be, but definitely he did some things right, and clearly this is one of the things they did right. It looks like he observed the feast, at least Passover.
Yeah. And a verse I didn't include in the comic, I might have included it in the commentary, I don't know, but there's a Revelation 11:8, and it's, and their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt. And another kind of connection to Passover, what does Sodom and Egypt have in common? Well, if we just read the stories as separate instances, there's nothing in common. But if this is a Passover event, that's what they have in common. Both places were destroyed, during Passover.
Yeah, that's a great
interesting.
observation.
Yeah, from Revelation.
Say the address again.
Revelation 11:8.
Nice.
Okay, all right. So y'all look that up. That's a good one. And then this goes on just to explain. Does it say anything else about unleavened bread? It's just telling the story here, I think.
Yeah, it's just telling the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
sometimes I include the whole chapter because I want to make sure people are getting the context and not just saying, just not
Cherry picking,
that I'm
right?
not just cherry picking something to say, oh, look, these match. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Read the whole thing.
Yeah, that's right. So, and I think we would all tell people, read it for yourself. Don't take our word for it. You go read. You read these passages and see this. So,
Yep.
And that's what he wants. He wants us to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling, and to look into it. So, so this just goes on to continue to tell the story about Lot, and so it talks about
and their escape from there, which again, going back to Passover, they escaped right after Passover.
Right.
So another parallel there in verse 22, haste thee, escape thither. I'm not great at King James.
No, me neither. And so it definitely there's definitely parallels, and I think that's an interesting point to make when we look at Scripture. Start looking for commonalities, and the Passover, you can see, there's always some, especially in both of these stories, there's a destroying angel, if you will, going around kicking butt and taking names, and then there was a way out, and there were rules to follow, and if you didn't follow these rules, well, there were terrible consequences to this. And then even at Shavuot, you see the same kind of principle. Shavuot, there's always fire. There's sometimes the number 3,000 speaking languages, and so there are multiple places. Once you start seeing these, the more you go through Torah, the more you're able to go, hey, wait, that looks like this, and it does help you kind of connect the dots and maybe see things you didn't see before.
Right, you pick out the patterns because the word rhymes, basically.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, it does.
Agreed.
And then I think too on this one, Another connection would be that as when they exodus from Sodom and Gomorrah, he has a place for them in the wilderness, but they want to go back to the city. So
Yeah.
it's similar to when the Israelites come out. They want to go back to the city, whereas he's sending them into the wilderness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's good too, because that is another parallel. Yeah.
Yeah.
He grants Lot that, but he doesn't grant the Israelites that.
Right.
Maybe because of Lot.
Maybe so.
Maybe.
Maybe so. What some bad things happen here. And we want you to read about them if you don't know them. And then also Exodus 12. This will take us outside to outside the page, and I may or may not be recording, but I can figure this out later.
Perfect.
So Exodus 12 is just giving you the specifics of the Passover, and about. So Jake, why don't you read that?
All right. Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron in Egypt, "This month will be the very first month of the year for you. Tell the whole community of Israel, on the 10th day of this month, each man must take a lamb or a young goat for his family, one animal per household. A household may be too small to eat a whole animal. That household and one next door can share one animal. Choose your animal based on the number of people and what each person can eat. Your animal must be a 1-year-old male that has no defects. You may choose a lamb or a young goat. Take care of it until the 14th day of this month."
And go ahead and read to there.
All right. Then at dusk, all the assembled people from the community of Israel must slaughter their animals. They must take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they will eat the animals. The meat must be eaten that same night. It must be roasted over a fire and eaten with bitter herbs and unleavened bread.
There you go. All right, so hopefully we can get back to here. There we go.
Beautiful.
Okay. And then Leviticus 23, 4 through 8. Joshua, would you read this?
Okay. The following are Yahweh's appointed festivals with holy assemblies, which you must announce at their appointed times. The 14th day of the first month in the evening is Yahweh's Passover. The 15th day of the same month is Yahweh's festival of unleavened bread. For 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. On the first day there will be a holy assembly. Don't do any regular work. Bring Yahweh a sacrifice by fire for 7 days. On the 7th day there will be a holy assembly. Do not do any regular work.
There you go. So I think we covered all the scriptures that go with Lot there. And then this one is in the way of women, which I know nothing about. So, and it's the story where Rachel wouldn't get up because she was sitting on some idols. And so, if you don't know that story, go look that up. And we're gonna look at some of the scriptures in Genesis 31:34. It says Rachel had taken idols and had put them in her camel's saddlebag and was sitting on them. And Laban rummaged through the whole tent but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, father, but I can't get up to greet you. I'm having my period." So even though Laban had made a thorough search, he didn't find the idols. So, just like any good man, if a woman says that to you, you're not asking any more questions. You're done. So, you know, there's no discussion needed at this point. Like, okay, I'm moving on.
Yeah. And I point out this one, especially with the law, and I know we'll get to that in a second, but because there's scripture later on, and I don't remember where it talks about it, but God talks against having relations with a woman while she's on her period, and how that's something that he doesn't like either. And so if God's saying it, it's not because no one's not ever done it. It's because people are doing it. He's like, don't do that.
Yeah.
And so Laban, we can't assume that Laban just didn't want to touch what Rachel is sitting on because men are grossed out by it, by a woman on her period. God warns against that some men aren't necessarily grossed out about it and they shouldn't have relations with a woman on there. So we can't assume that Laban is just giving her privacy because all men are like that. We have to assume that because there's a commandment, that Laban's actually following this commandment.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point.
going back to letting the Bible interpret the Bible.
Yep. Very good.
However, Laban didn't seem too keen on the idol part, the idol worship part of the Bible.
True.
Yeah.
But it goes back to, I mean, some things that people are holding. I mean, look at the Pharisees. There's some things that they held that they were doing right, but there was a lot of stuff that they were holding in place of
Right.
against what God says, and and Yeshua calls them out on it.
Yeah.
And it's not. We can't assume everybody's doing everything right all the time. Some people are going to do some of it right, and other things are going to not do right.
And then let's talk about this scripture. You know, that this one brings up the scripture you're talking about in Leviticus 15, 19 through 28. It lays out very specifically that when a woman has her monthly period, she'll be unclean for 7 days. And if you touch her, you're going to be unclean till evening. And anything that she lies down or she sits on will be unclean. Even her bed or clothes, you got to wash your bodies, and you're unclean till evening. And then it goes on to talk about in 24, if a man has sexual intercourse with her while she's on his period, he will be unclean for 7 days. Any bed he lies on will become unclean. So that was the part there you were talking about. So yeah,
It's like he puts the guilt onto himself,
yeah,
essentially.
Yeah.
It's the you have the same punishment as the original crime, basically. That kind of idea.
yeah. So that is the background of knowing why she could say what she said. Is she understood this? This was practiced, or she wouldn't have known this information.
Oh, just to clarify, I'm not saying that being on your period makes you guilty of a crime.
Yes, that's good to clarify.
just got to clarify things like that, because there's people say
I
things.
think it goes well too. I mean, it's not saying, it's not saying anything bad. It's saying they're unclean. I mean, we're none of us are women. I think all of us are married, and we're to talk to our wives about it. I mean, that's a time that they're not feeling great, for one.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the purification after childbirth. I think that was come up recently with I don't know if it was a Torah portion or something recently, or just something we were digging through here at home. But the same sort of thing where there's so many days after childbirth, and and talking to my wife after the kids we've had, she's like, yeah, it's like I don't want to be touched or anything by anybody, except my child, for those periods of time. And it's like, it makes sense. And we had our children pre-Torah, and so looking back on it and seeing, she's like, yeah, I can see that those were times where I needed to be left alone.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a protection for the woman as much as anything.
Yeah. Definitely, and many men have learned lessons the hard way on some of these things. But Torah laid it out for us to follow. And then here we go. We've got another one. And so, what is this one with Tamar?
So Tamar and Judah. So Judah got Tamar for his first son as a wife to her. And this one, the other ones, I feel like somebody might argue with and saying you're jumping to conclusions, or you're assuming things. This one, especially whenever we get to read it, how it's worded and how Judah puts it, you can't say that's not the law that was given at Mount Sinai, because Ur was killed by God, and then Onan, Judah says, hey, go and perform your brother-in-law duties and produce offspring for your brother. And that's what many scriptures call the Levitical marriage.
Yeah. So
is what the subtitle is.
So let's look at this Genesis 38 and read whatever you want to read out of here, Joshua.
Yeah. So starting in verse 6, Judah chose a wife for his firstborn son Ur. Her name was Tamar. Ur angered Yahweh, so Yahweh took his life. Then Judah said to Onan, go sleep with your brother's widow, do your duty as her brother-in-law, and produce a descendant for your brother. So that was the point there that I'm trying to bring out in the comic of Onan was supposed to go and produce offspring.
Mm-hmm.
Onan didn't. And then later on, whenever it comes to Sheila, and I'm trying to find that real quick.
Verse 12 there, maybe?
Yeah, after a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had finished mourning, he and his friend, I'm sorry, I'm trying to read it. He and his friend Hira from Adullam went to Timnah, where the men were shearing Judah's sheep. As soon as Tamar was told her father-in-law was on the way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered her face with a veil. No, that wasn't the part. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. It's the part. Oh, it's 11. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Return to your father's home and live as a widow until my son Shelah grows up." He thought his son might die like his brothers, so Tamar went to live to his father's home. So here we have a third brother, because Onan was killed too, and he's like, "Hey, wait, you'll get Shelah, but go live as a widow for a bit," because he was actually not ever intending to give Shelah over. But again, following that line of the brother must produce a offspring for the brother that died.
Right.
So we're seeing it go down the line, which again goes back to the story the Sadducees threw at Yeshua of a woman, married husbands. Each of them died before giving a offspring. Which one is the husband in the afterlife? It's the same thing. I mean, we can. Again, letting Scripture interpret Scripture, we know that those 7 husbands this wife had, or this woman had, were brothers, and they're performing this, this commandment right here.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's good. Good observation for sure. So yeah, very clear that that they knew exactly what they were supposed to do, and for whatever reason, he was not willing to share his inheritance, share this with her. And I'm sure it came down to greed, don't you think? That he just was trying to have more money, basically, not having to share.
Probably, yeah. And then what I find interesting on their story too, and I believe it's not on this page, but it's near the end of it of chapter 38.
Nope, that's Deuteronomy.
No, you don't have it on there. But it's something along the lines of Judah, whenever he finds out that Tamar had used him to perform that ritual, or that commandment, if you will, he calls her more righteous than he is.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that is interesting. So, and it's a fantastic story for sure. So, it's definitely not your G-rated story. But what I always tell people on this one is basically, she takes his car keys and his wallet and keeps them, and then later is like, "Oh yeah, you missing these? You need these?" Because he immediately knew that he didn't have those things, because he carried these things with him everywhere he went,
and he was had.
Yeah, and they identified his power and his authority, and he gave all that to her. And it's a crazy story for sure. But good. And then Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10 also talks about basically confirming the exact same thing, the same thing about having your duty as a brother-in-law.
Yep. Yeah, verse 5, when brothers live together and one of them dies without having a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother must marry her and sleep with her. He must do his duty as her brother-in-law, almost word for word, as what Judah told Onan.
Yeah.
He must do his duty as her brother-in-law.
Right.
Yeah. And then even kind of quotes where it's kind of interesting here, but if a man doesn't want to marry his brother's widow, she must go to the leaders of the city at the city gate. She must say, "My brother-in-law refuses to let his brother's name continue in Israel. He doesn't want to do his duty as my brother-in-law." Then the leaders of the city must summon him, talk to him. If he persists in saying that he doesn't want to marry her, his brother's widow must go to him to the presence of the leaders, and she must take off one of his sandals and spit in his face. And then she must make this formal statement: "This is what happens to a man who refuses to continue his brother's family line." then in Israel his family will be called the family of the man without a sandal.
That sounds like a good movie title.
Yes. And so, yeah, definitely some things are lost in translation because it's like the family of a man without a sandal. We're like, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but when you think about a sandal covenant, and the sandal was the marker for your property, maybe it affected your ability to go into land agreements and buy land or something if you couldn't, or go into a sandal covenant if you couldn't lay a sandal down. Or you had this reputation and people are like, oh, I don't want anything to do with you. I would imagine there's something like that to it.
Could be.
But and then in Tamar's story, does it kind of imply that she went to the leaders of the city? But yeah, did you have that pulled up about Tamar?
Yes. And there it says, after 3 months later, in verse 24, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. And she was brought out, and she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify who these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. And then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her my son Shelah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
no, it doesn't mention that she was in front of the elders of the city, but Judah.
I think it's
may
to
have been
say
at this point.
he was probably a leader of the city. So yeah, it's just
Yeah.
kind of interesting. It's almost like it did probably get followed to the T, really.
To me, this
So-
almost kind of mirrors the Judas story, where the person in charge refuses to make the proper amends, and so he goes and takes matters into his own hands. And that's what Tamar does.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so Jake, actually, was it Julia that said that? So she in one of our Shabbats, she was talking about Judas that way, and I hadn't thought about that before. That
Right, because the penalty is supposed to, if you bear false witness, then the charge is you get whatever the other person, what you accuse them of, would have gotten. And for Judas, it would have been death, would have been the penalty. So,
didn't mean to throw that curveball
Yeah.
at you, but I thought that was a pretty interesting concept, and you know,
that is, yeah.
because people often debate, is Judas saved or not, and Jake and I did a thing about that recently, and we definitely, well, I guess it was like 2 years ago, but we definitely came to the conclusion that it's a real possibility that he's saved, and we have to acknowledge that. And I think
that at
people
least
have
it's a
taught us
possibility,
that
right?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Sorry to rabbit trail, but
Yeah.
we tend to do
No,
that.
you're fine. You're fine.
So, and then we've got clearly Joseph, and so Joseph with the cougar, and so if you don't know about the Joseph Cougar story,
Joseph Cougar Mellencamp.
yes, Joseph, yeah, very good. So, so we'll take a look at this story, and so we'll take a look at how did he know the law before the law, or what was the law. So, Joshua, will you read this one for us?
Yeah. So Genesis 39, starting in verse 7. After a while, his master's wife began to desire Joseph, so she said, come to bed with me. But Joseph refused and said to her, my master doesn't concern himself with anyone in the house. He trusts me with everything he owns. No one in this house is greater than I. He's kept nothing back from me except you, because you're his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against Elohim? So he's not worried about he's worried about sinning against God. That's the crux of his statement there. How do we know this is a sin against God?
Yeah.
Without the law.
Yeah, that's good. How would he know? And this is another story in Genesis, well before the Mount Sinai. And then in Mount Sinai in Exodus 20:14, I've repeated it for some reason, never commit adultery. I guess emphasis added.
Yeah.
Never committed.
And then I think of what I meant to. It seems like there's a Deuteronomy. It's just my mistake. There, Seems like
It was
the
Leviticus
Leviticus.
18:20.
Leviticus
18:20,
18:20 says the same
and you
thing.
shall not lie sexually with your neighbor's wife, and so make yourself unclean with her.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So,
So so clearly this is another instance of the law before the law.
yeah,
Great.
yeah. Now again, another pretty clear-cut one, just like the Judah and Tamar one.
Yeah, yeah. Very clear, and one that when you don't really think too much about, and definitely no one ever explained any of that to me when I was a kid. When you learn the story of Joseph. All right.
Yeah, yep.
And then we've got another one. This one is, what's this one about drinking this thing?
The jealous husband. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, this one's not. Many people probably don't catch it because it happens in Exodus, and so you think, oh, the law's already being given. Well, some of it has, not all of it, because the law of the jealous husband is not actually given until Numbers 5.
Mm-hmm.
But this account happens in Exodus 32.
And, and I feel like this is one of the most important concepts for someone to understand. And once you understand this, Scripture opens up and you see things, because then you can truly understand why one of the big reasons Yeshua has to die on the cross is because he takes this curse of the bitter waters, or the jealous husband, upon himself, and the curse that we are all very much guilty of, and the whole world is guilty of. And and he took that, and I think when he prays, may this cup pass before me, he's talking about this cup of bitter waters. And no one ever explained that to me. I'm like, I'm thinking he's drinking from the cup of wrath. And I guess maybe metaphorically you can say that, but I think literally it was because he's drinking the cup of bitter waters is why he says that.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I definitely agree with that, and because he knows we're guilty. I mean, so he knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It is no doubt in his mind. So the golden calf. I think we should read this one because it is so crucial, and so I'll read till verse 7 here. So, and this is Genesis 32. When the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron, and they said to him, "We don't know what's happened to this Moses who led us out of Egypt. Make gods who will lead us." And Aaron said to them, "Have your wives, sons, and daughters take off their gold earrings they are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off their gold earrings and handed them to Aaron. After he had worked on the gold with a tool, he made it into a statue of a calf. Then they said, "Israel, here are your gods who brought you out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it and announced, "Tomorrow there'll be a festival in Yahweh's honor." Early the next morning, the people sacrificed burnt offerings and brought fellowship offerings. Afterwards, they sat down to a feast, which turned into an orgy. Yahweh said to Moses, "Go back down there. Your people whom you brought out of Egypt have ruined everything. They've already turned away from what I've commanded them to live, and they've made a statue of a calf for themselves. They've bowed down to it and offered sacrifices. They've said, 'Israel, here are your gods who brought you out of Egypt.'"
Yahweh added, "I've seen these people, and they are impossible to deal with. Now leave me alone. I'm so angry with them, I'm going to destroy them. Then I'll make you into a great nation." But Moses pleaded with Yahweh, his Elohim. "Yahweh," he said, "why are you so angry with your people whom you brought out of Egypt, using your great power and mighty hand? Don't let the Egyptians say, 'He was planning all along to kill them in the mountains and wipe them off the face of the earth. That's why he brought them out of our land.' Don't be so angry. Reconsider your decision to bring this disaster on your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. You took an oath, swearing on yourself. You told them, 'I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. I will give to your descendants all the land I spoke of. It will be their permanent possession.' So Yahweh reconsidered his threat to destroy his people." Moses turned and went down the mountain carrying the 2 tablets of God's words. They were written on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of Elohim, and the writing was Elohim's writing inscribed on the tablets. Then Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting. He said to Moses, "It's the sound of war in the camp." Moses replied, "It's not the sound of winners shouting. It's not the sound of losers crying. It's the sound of a wild celebration that I hear. When he came near the camp, he saw the calf and the dancing. In a burst of anger, Moses threw down the tablets and smashed them at the foot of the mountain. Then he took the calf they had made, burned it, ground it into powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Moses asked Aaron, "What did these people do to you that you encouraged them to commit such a serious sin?"
"Don't be angry, sir," Aaron answered. "You know these people are evil. They said to me, 'We don't know what's happened to this Moses who brought us out of Egypt. Make gods for us. They will lead us.' So I told them, 'Take off the gold they were wearing,' and they gave it to me. I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf." Aaron had let the people get out of control, and they became an object of ridicule to their enemies. When Moses saw this, he stood at the entrance to the camp and said, "If you're on Yahweh's side, come over here to me." And then all the Levites gathered around him. And then 20, which actually is like a scene from the Alamo with John Wayne. Then he said to them, "This is what Elohim of Israel says. Each of you put on your sword, go back and forth from one end of the camp to the other. Kill all your relatives, friends, and neighbors." They did what Moses told them, and that day about 3,000 people died. So, how does he know who's guilty?
Yep. And that goes into the law. If we pull up the Numbers account and see what happens whenever you drink the bitter waters, your thigh wastes away and your abdomen expands. Well, if your thigh's wasting away, you're not running nowhere. You know?
They weren't running away.
Yep. Numbers 5:11 through 31. And the Lord spoke with Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel. If any man's wife goes astray and breaks faith with him, if a man lies with her sexually and is hidden from the eyes of her husband, and she is undetected, though she has defiled herself, and there is no witness against her, since she has not taken an act, if the spirit of jealousy comes over him, and he is jealous of his wife who has defiled herself, or if the spirit of jealousy comes over him, and he is jealous of his wife, though she has not defiled herself, then the man shall bring his wife to the priest and bring offering required of her, 1/10 of an ephah of barley flour. He shall pour no oil on it and put no frankincense on it, for it is a grain offering of jealousy, a grain offering of remembrance, bringing iniquities for remembrance." And here's where it gets into the water. In verse 16, "And the priest shall bring her near and set her before the Lord, and the priest shall take holy water in an earthen vessel and take some of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle and put it into the water. The priest shall set the woman before the Lord and unbind her hair of the woman's head and place it in her hands the grain offering of remembrance, which is the grain offering of jealousy, in his hand the priest. Then the priest will say to her, if no other man has had sexual intercourse with you and you haven't been unfaithful to your husband, you're not guilty. This bitter water that can bring a curse will not harm you. If in fact you have been unfaithful and have had sexual intercourse with another man, may Yahweh make you an example for your people to see what happens when the curse of the oath comes true. Yahweh will make your uterus drop and your stomach swell."
That sounds like a terrible thing.
Yeah, which that one is interesting because it says uterus. Other translations say your thigh fall away,
right,
and your stomach swell.
Yeah. This is the nog, and so it is if you've ever looked
take
at it
some
before.
liberties.
Yeah, it's not always perfect, but I think the thigh rotting away. I think the nog just did this because it's a woman, and but definitely.
But yeah, but when it comes to them running through and killing the 3,000, well, again, if their thigh fell away because they drank the bitter waters, they're not able to run off.
Yeah, no, that's good. They have clearly been found out, and don't you know they're like, what is happening to me? Because this is a mixed multitude, and how many of them knew all of this? I don't know how many of them knew the consequence.
Not many of them.
but definitely there were people in this group that knew for sure, and they're watching from a distance, watching this stuff go down, like, oh no.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's always a remnant, but I always look at too that Mount Sinai and all that as a reteaching, because many of the people had forgotten. I think that's a very important thing to remember and understand, that many of them did
they started off there with Joseph, and Joseph was knew about the commandments and the things that pleased the Father, and at some point, a lot of this stuff just got lost. They got fat and happy in Egypt. They're the lap of luxury in the known world at the time, and their life was pretty cush. In a lot of ways, it's a lot like what we live like, and they had it pretty easy in some aspects. Yes, they were slaves at some point, but it took a while to get there. And they got very acclimated in that culture that they were surrounded with. That's why later they're always like, I wish we could go back.
Right.
Yep.
So anyway, great. That's great. And so that is why you came up with the law before the law, as you started. So you started seeing these things and came up with this. Was there anything else you wanted to say about the law before the law, how you came about?
Yeah, it was just that. It was just in my studies, and again, like y'all were pointing out earlier, if we don't know the law, we don't see these things when we read these stories. We just read them and kind of brush them off, and we're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting. I don't know why God's telling me this, but if we familiarize ourselves with the law, we can see that it's throughout Scripture. People are doing it or not doing it, and that's why it's being brought up, is because God has a set standard. This is what your function is as a human being. Was Ecclesiastes 3:17? For this is the whole duty of man, obey God's commandments.
Yeah.
The whole duty of man. And so that's our purpose in life. This isn't just a suggestion guide. This is what we're supposed to do. And whenever we look at it that way, we can then see in these stories before the law was ever given that either man doing it or man failing at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. No, that's really good. I so appreciate that you thought that way, and that you continue to make these comics. And we ask that people follow you on your socials and go buy one of these books and bring it in. And there's some great resources. And once again, you just wrote a new book. And what's the name of the book again?
The new one is I Cannot Keep the Law. The not's crossed out, but you can't always cross out things when you're searching. So it is I Cannot Keep the Law. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Cannot Keep the Law by Joshua Myers. And so they can buy it on, where all do you sell it?
That's on Amazon because I'm self-publishing right now, so they're the ones publishing it for me. But
okay, yep. So
yep.
And we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and we look forward to further discussions and maybe more law before the law. And who knows, there may be a few other things that you find and make cartoons about. Is there any particular piece of your current cartooning that we should know about or point people towards?
The thing that I've had done going on recently that I really enjoy is I've titled them in the background WWJD, but they're kind of it's the mainstream Christian Jesus. Who I've drawn to look like, how we always see him. I call him affectionately Mullet Jesus, and Yeshua, and kind of the differences between them. And I always have MJ coming out with, hey kids, and giving honestly really bad advice, but if it was advice that, but it makes sense theologically with what we've been taught in church. And then Yeshua in the background, saying, no, that's not what I teach. No, that's not how this works, or, whatever. And so I've been really having fun with that. I've done, 2 or 3 of those. And so I'm hoping I get some more of those out.
Yeah, that's awesome. The way I described that, so you said, we'd say it again, you said he was mullet?
Mullet Jesus.
Mullet Jesus. I love a mullet. That's funny. Well, one of the thing that I've always described it is, I've said the barefoot hippie Jesus, and so yeah. That's like everybody's loving, peace, love, happiness, man. And I think that's pretty much the Jesus that everybody believes in. And there's a terrible movie that I'm very familiar with, and that's Talladega Nights. And in Talladega Nights, there's a famous scene where he prays to dear baby Jesus. And
Yep.
you know, the first time I saw that, I think other people I was watching with, they thought it was pretty sacrilegious, but I was actually like, wait a minute, there's some theology here, and that is true. You know,
He's really nailing it.
that's right. He nailed it. You know, people are fine with the dear baby little Jesus in the manger, the little baby that can't do anything and is helpless. They're cool with that. But you know, the other parts of him, they're like, oh no, we don't want that. So,
Yep.
so that's a good observation. I look forward to seeing those and hearing more about it. So, anyway, Jake, do you have anything else to add?
No, I just really appreciate that you coming on and the work that you're doing to kind of get these messages out there. And I like the creativity.
Well, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's
Yeah,
fantastic.
I enjoy doing them. So as long as other people are liking them, I'm happy with that.
Yep, yeah, we're happy to support your work and promote your work. And so, once again, if you don't know Joshua Myers, go follow him. Go check out some things that he's done, and we've given you lots of links here and descriptions. And buy his book, follow him on social media, and we appreciate your time. Joshua and Jake and I are going to continue to talk for just a minute, but we're going to go ahead and sign off the podcast. This is Matt
And Jake, signing out.
and Joshua signing out, and
Bye.
we'll catch you later.